I'm Avery, 37, an urban planner in Athens, Georgia. One night over dinner, my brother set down his fork and said, "You don't even have a family to worry about." I'd just spent years rebuilding my life after they left me sleeping in a car. Now they were measuring my walls and calling dibs on my guest room. If this hits home, tell me, where are you listening from today? The night I moved into my first home, I set the table for 3. Just in case. There was no reason to expect they'd show up. Not really, but I did it anyway. Habit, maybe. Hope, more likely. I poured a single glass of wine, letting it sit across from me, untouched. It gathered sweat under the amber kitchen light, casting a dull reflection on the wood grain I had spent the last 5 years saving for. The chair in front of me stayed empty. My name is Avery Holt. I'm 37 years old, single, and I live in Athens, Georgia. I design neighborhoods for a living, helping other people figure out where their front doors should go, how their lives might flow through space. But for most of mine, I couldn't quite find my own footing. This house, though, it's modest, just 3 bedrooms and a patch of yard. But it's mine. Every nail, every window latch, every scuff on the newly sanded floors, paid for with long hours and quiet sacrifices. You'd think someone would be proud. 2 years ago, I called home to tell them I'd been promoted. It had taken me 6 years to move from analyst to project lead. I was excited, nervous. My mother answered. "Still no one to bring home with you?" she asked before I could get the words out. My father's voice chimed in from the background. "Making money is fine, Avery, but that's not family." They didn't ask what the promotion meant. They didn't ask how I was. Tonight, I tried again. I'd left a voicemail 3 days ago, letting them know I was closing on the house, invited them for dinner. I even said I'd cook, which, frankly, is a risk for everyone involved. No reply. No call. Just silence. I ate anyway. The lasagna turned out dry, but the garlic bread didn't burn, so I counted that as a win. I sat for a while longer, picking at the crust, chewing slowly, pretending I wasn't checking my phone for the 7th time in an hour. After clearing the table, I opened my laptop. There were no missed calls, no texts. But there it was, a message from Donnie Sharp, my old professor, the one who first taught me how to read zoning maps like stories. "Saw the closing papers," he wrote. "Proud of you, Holt. You earned this." Another notification came through. "Jules, if they don't show up, don't worry. You did." I smiled, tightly, the kind of smile that holds back things with teeth. Not because I felt joyful, but because I realized something important. I had stopped expecting approval. Maybe that's what growing up looks like. Not triumph, but subtraction. Letting go of expectations that always come back empty-handed. I got up, pulled a sheet of stationery from the drawer, and wrote out another invitation. Handwritten this time. Formal, polite. The kind of thing my mother used to say had good manners. Maybe it was a final olive branch. Maybe it was just closure in cursive. I folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and walked it down the street to the mailbox. As I reached to lift the flag, I caught sight of headlights flickering across the corner of my yard. A dark SUV idled across the street, engine humming low. My heart caught for a moment. Was that Travis's car? Same model, same faded UGA decal on the back, but the windows were tinted, and the driver never looked over. I stood there for a few seconds, envelope still in my hand. Coincidence, probably. But I dropped the letter in anyway, and the box clanked shut with finality. Back home, I looked at the table again. The olive green tablecloth I'd chosen, the one my mother once called cheap-looking, was still smooth and freshly ironed. I kept it anyway. It matched the kitchen light, made the room feel warmer. More mine. That chair would stay empty for now, but not forever. 3 years ago today, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at a severance packet with my name printed too neatly on top. I remember the silence in the conference room, how the air seemed to thin out the moment HR walked in. I remember the faces of the other planners around me, every one of us pretending to be surprised. We weren't. The economy had been limping for months, and public sector projects were the first to go. But knowing what's coming doesn't soften the landing. They gave me 2 weeks' pay. I had 3 months of savings. I thought I'd be fine. I wasn't. It's funny how memory works. It doesn't just remember facts. It remembers temperature, weight, silence. And that day felt cold, even though it was June. The weight sat right in my chest, and the silence was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. I went home, opened my laptop, and did what seemed reasonable. I called my father. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad," I said. I tried to sound casual. I failed. "Listen, I just got let go from work. Budget cuts. I'll be okay, just things might get tight." There was a pause, then his voice, clear and firm. "Men make their own way, Avery. Asking for help is weakness." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a full minute. No callback, no text, nothing. I called my mother next. She picked up. I told her the same thing. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's tough. We'll keep you in our prayers." Then, without irony, she added, "Have you thought about cutting back on lattes? That stuff adds up." I didn't have the heart to tell her I hadn't bought a coffee outside the house in weeks. I was eating discount ramen and watching YouTube tutorials on how to stretch frozen vegetables into 4 meals. Travis didn't answer his phone, but he left a voicemail 2 days later. "Sorry to hear about the job, but we can't keep bailing you out, man. Some of us have families to take care of." I had bailed him out once, $2,000 when his car broke down, and he was between jobs. He never paid it back. I never asked. I tried to be calm, logical. Maybe they were busy. Maybe it wasn't personal. But as days turned into weeks, and the job applications yielded only polite rejections or radio silence, the truth settled in slowly. No one was coming. I sold my watch. The one Dad gave me for graduation. I sold my books. Even my grandmother's silver tea set. The one she'd promised me, saying, "This stays in the family." Apparently, I didn't qualify. I spent my days sending resumes, adjusting my cover letter to fit job titles that didn't quite match my skills, and trying not to calculate the exact date I'd run out of money. By the 3rd month, I was checking the bank app more than I was checking email. The numbers felt like a countdown. Rent was due, groceries were thin, the car was paid off, but the insurance wasn't. No one called. Not for my birthday, not to ask if I was okay, not even to tell me they couldn't help. There's something uniquely painful about being abandoned when you're not loud about your needs. You realize just how invisible you are, especially to the people who should see you most clearly. Family, I was told growing up, was everything. Family doesn't give up on you. Family shows up. Mine didn't. One morning, I packed my laptop and walked to the public library to use their Wi-Fi. I sat in a corner near the back, where the chairs didn't squeak as much, and sent out 15 more applications. Then I took a break, just long enough to rest my eyes. Is that who I think it is? I looked up. Donnie Sharp, my old planning professor from UGA. A little grayer, a little thinner, but still with the same dry humor in his tone. "Donnie?" I stood up, self-conscious in a shirt I'd steam-pressed using a kettle because I couldn't afford dry cleaning. He gave me a once-over but didn't comment on the shirt. "Heard you were in town. You working?" "Looking," I said. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. "Come by the office Monday," he said. "It's not glamorous and it doesn't pay much, but it's a start." I could have cried right there, but I didn't. I just nodded, stuck out my hand, and hoped he couldn't feel how cold it was. That night, I walked home with a folder full of resumes and a heart that beat just a little lighter. It had been months since anyone said, "I've got a place for you." The same week I signed the contract with Donnie's firm, the first contract with my name printed next to the title Project Lead. A group email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Holt Family Christmas. Everyone made it." Everyone but me. The message came from my mother, sent to what she still calls the family thread. The kind of email that goes out once a year, more tradition than communication. Attached was a single photo. I opened it slowly, already knowing what I wouldn't see. Travis stood in the middle, arms looped around Lana and the kids, both of whom were dressed in matching red and green outfits, the kind with built-in candy cane stripes. My father stood behind them, stiff in his Sunday blazer, one hand resting awkwardly on Travis's shoulder. My mother held a casserole dish and a wine glass, smiling like someone on a catalog cover. Even Aunt Celia was there, her scarf too long and her expression unreadable. There was no sign that I'd ever existed in that family. Not a stocking with my name, not even a mention in the email body. Just, "Wonderful day. The grandkids made it special." I stared at the image until my screen dimmed. Later that day, I showed Jules. "Were you invited?" she asked, frowning as she leaned closer to my laptop. I shook my head. "They assumed I was busy. They always do." Jules raised an eyebrow, but didn't say what I knew she was thinking. 2 days later, I met Evan for coffee. It was still new between us then, still unsure footing. He didn't know much about my family yet, and I wasn't in a hurry to explain. But I mentioned the photo. I don't know why. Maybe because something about Evan's quiet presence made it easier to be honest. "No one's spoken to you in 3 years?" he asked. "Not unless you count forwarded articles about Travis's awards." I tried to sound amused. I didn't. Evan looked at me for a long moment. "I think that would hurt me, even if I didn't want to admit it." That was the thing, though. It didn't hurt like a cut. It hurt like a cavity. Dull, hidden, ignored until it aches into everything else. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed on the sink. A text from Elaine. "You know Travis is moving soon, right? Your place has extra rooms." No hello. No, how are you? Just a suggestion that my home might serve a better purpose. I stared at the screen, toothbrush still foaming in my mouth. For a full hour afterward, I sat on the couch in the dark, the message still unread but glowing through the notification bar. It wasn't that I didn't know how to respond. It was that I was too tired to be polite. Still, the next morning I typed back, "Let me think about it." A lie. I already knew the answer. A few days passed, quiet ones. I poured myself into work. The city had approved the Greenway expansion near Broad Street, and Donnie handed me the lead coordination role. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't expect they'd ask. Then, on a late Saturday morning, I heard tires crunching gravel outside. I pulled back the curtain. Travis's SUV. He stepped out with Emma and Jacob, both kids already bouncing with energy. I opened the front door before they could ring the bell. "Thought we'd show the kids around," Travis said, grinning like this was normal. "Let them get used to the neighborhood, you know? Never hurts to explore." I didn't say anything. Not right away. Emma darted toward the magnolia tree in the front yard, the one I'd planted last fall with my bare hands and a borrowed shovel. She squealed as she spun around its base. I watched them run through my grass, and a dull thud settled in my chest. Back inside, I glanced again at that Christmas photo still open on my laptop. The space where I used to stand, far left, next to the fireplace, had been taken up by a neighbor's golden retriever. He looked happy, mouth open, tongue out, tail blurred in motion. No one seemed to miss me. "Emma loves that tree already," Travis called out, as his daughter wrapped her arms around the young magnolia in the corner of the yard. I watched her from the front steps, one hand still holding my keys, the other gripping the to-go coffee I hadn't taken a sip of since pulling into the driveway. I hadn't expected company. Certainly not all of them. It was Saturday. I'd been working overtime the past 2 weeks, helping prep the Broad Street proposal for submission. I left that morning in the dark and came back to a house I no longer recognized. The porch light was on. Someone had switched the bulb to a warmer hue. My welcome mat was askew. The sliding glass door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon toast and lemon cleaner. Lana popped her head out from the kitchen. "We figured we'd wait for you out back," she said cheerily, holding a glass of sweet tea that wasn't hers. "Hope you don't mind." Behind her, Elaine was gently tapping along the living room walls with her knuckles. "Solid oak?" she asked, looking impressed. "This layout's much better than our old place." I set my keys down on the hallway table. Jacob tore through the living room, yelling something about dinosaurs. Emma followed, pausing only to kick off her glittery sneakers before bolting up the stairs. Franklin was standing near the thermostat, peering at it with mild interest. "What's the HOA like around here?" he asked. "Quiet neighborhood. Good resale value, I imagine." "Very reasonable," I replied slowly, considering it wasn't meant to be shared. Evan came in through the front door a moment later, holding a paper bag from the corner bakery. He glanced around, taking in the full scene. "This wasn't part of the plan," he whispered, handing me the bag. "Want me to say something?" I shook my head. "Let's just see how far it goes." The answer, apparently, was pretty far. We followed the commotion up the stairs. Lana was in the hallway, snapping photos of the guest room on her phone. She glanced over and smiled. "Good bones in this space. We could make it really cozy." "Cozy for who?" I asked. Emma popped out from the main bedroom. "Mommy said this is my new room," she announced, beaming. "I get the window and Jacob gets the mattress on the floor." "In the office," Jacob added helpfully from behind her. "That's my playroom now." I stood still. Not angry, not yet. Just invisible. Like I'd stepped into a dream where I was watching someone else's life unfold in my house. I didn't remember giving permission. Then again, I hadn't said no. That night, after they left, after Lana gathered the kids, Elaine offered to bring over some real curtains next time, and Travis gave me a half hug on the way out. I stood in the middle of the guest room and stared at the indentations their feet had left in the carpet. My house had always been quiet. That day, it had felt loud, like someone turned up the volume on a life I didn't ask for. I walked down to the closet, opened the safe, and took out the original floor plan. It was wrinkled now, the corners soft from years of handling. I flipped it over and wrote on the back, slowly, deliberately, "What they won't take." I pinned it to the corkboard near my desk. Later, I stepped outside, barefoot, the air still holding a bit of warmth from the day. The magnolia tree stood steady under the porch light. A single leaf twitched in the breeze. I had planted it last fall, dug the hole myself, lined it with compost, staked it for support. It was supposed to mean something. Growth, foundation, roots I could call my own. Now they were hanging their dreams on it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message. "Dad's bringing the bunk bed next week," Elaine wrote. "Better to start settling early, for the kids." The Dogwood Festival was one of my favorite parts of spring in Athens. It wasn't fancy. It didn't pretend to be more than it was. Local music, food trucks, kids with painted faces, and stalls filled with homemade soap and awkward birdhouses. The kind of place where people nod at each other in recognition, not reputation. It felt right to bring Evan. We hadn't done much publicly together yet, not because I was hiding him, but because I was still learning what it meant to share space again. But this felt easy, familiar, safe. He held my hand as we walked through the vendor tents. Jules was already there, perched at a folding table with a giant pitcher of homemade lemonade and a sign that said, "Ask me about the Greenway plan." I waved, and she mouthed, "Big day." I was scheduled to speak for a few minutes about the city's upcoming community project. Just a quick thank you to the volunteers, and some updates about Phase 2 of the trail development. Nothing major, but it felt like something. A step forward. I hadn't told my parents I'd be there. I hadn't told them about Evan either. Not because I was keeping secrets, but because I was done giving them things they didn't ask for. So when I saw Franklin and Elaine walking toward the gazebo, my chest tightened before I could stop it. Franklin wore his blazer like he always did to public events. Buttoned too high, a little stiff. Elaine had on her church smile, the one that made her look polite to strangers and distant to people who knew better. They walked like they belonged. I didn't move. Evan looked over, saw my jaw tense, and simply gave my hand a quick squeeze. "Smile and wave," I muttered, "just like it's a parade." Elaine reached us first. "Avery, what a surprise. We didn't know you were involved in this." "Project lead," Jules said before I could answer, handing me a cup of lemonade. "He built the trail design from the ground up." Elaine ignored her and turned to Evan. "You must be Evan. We've heard absolutely nothing about you." She smiled sweetly. "But thank you for sticking around. Avery really needs someone. Bless his heart." I stiffened. Franklin chuckled, looking around. "Nice turnout. You always were good at working solo. No family to worry about, huh? That's why the house works for you." Evan stayed still. His fingers twitched slightly against mine, but he didn't speak. Jules leaned in and whispered, "Want me to pull the plug on this?" I shook my head. "No, I need to see how far this goes." We walked toward the stage together. I gave my little speech, short and to the point. People clapped. Someone from the parks department handed me a reusable tote bag as a thank you. Evan took pictures. I pretended the tightness in my stomach was from the heat. Afterward, I circled back to the tent. Travis had arrived. He was holding a corn dog in one hand and a lemonade in the other, talking loudly to a small group of other parents. His voice carried. "He's always been more independent," Travis said, nodding toward me. "No wife, no kids, just zoning permits and blueprints." Someone laughed politely. I turned away. But then I heard it. Travis again. This time louder, clearer, almost like he wanted me to hear. "Avery doesn't even have a real family. Of course he has room." It didn't matter who he was talking to. What mattered was that it wasn't meant as a joke. It was meant as a truth, and it landed like one. I froze. My feet stayed rooted to the grass. Not because the words were inaccurate, but because he said them like a punchline, like I was the only one who didn't get the joke. Evan leaned in gently. "Do you want to go?" I shook my head, still watching Travis. "No," I said. "I want to remember this." That night, we sat on the porch with the lights off, just the sound of cicadas and Evan's hand resting on my knee. "Do you want us to be a family?" he asked, voice soft. I thought about it for a long time. "Not because I need one," I said finally. "Because I choose one." He nodded once, and that was enough. The next morning, a text lit up my phone from Elaine. "Franklin thinks your place is perfect. We'll talk more this weekend." I didn't respond. But I did notice something else in the crowd the day before. At the edge of the festival lawn, just beyond the shade tents, stood Aunt Celia. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. She just stood, arms crossed, watching. And when I caught her eye, she nodded. Once. That was all. But somehow it was the only thing that didn't hurt. I was packing for a 3-day conference in Atlanta when I opened the small fireproof safe tucked in the back of my closet. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a routine check to grab my passport, a couple of work receipts, and a hotel voucher. The contents were all where I left them, except for one small detail. The spare key I'd given my mother years ago was gone. Not misplaced, not tucked under a receipt or hiding beneath a folder. Gone. For a few minutes, I convinced myself I'd moved it and forgotten. That maybe I had tossed it in a drawer or it fell behind something during my last attempt to get organized. But I knew better. That key had lived in the same corner pocket of the safe for 4 years. The silence of the house felt heavier than usual. Evan had left the night before to visit his brother in Savannah. Jules had agreed to house sit while I was gone. Still, there was something in the air, a stillness that felt staged. I opened my phone, instinctively scrolling to my mother's Facebook page. I hadn't looked in months. I'd trained myself not to. But that morning, something tugged at me. And there it was, a post from 2 days prior. Franklin says this layout is perfect for us when we're ready. Beneath it, a photo of my kitchen. My kitchen, framed just wide enough to show the open shelves and the table tucked beneath the window. No caption explaining whose kitchen it was, no mention of a visit. Just implication. My stomach sank. I stepped outside, called her. "Did you take the key?" There was a pause. Then Elaine's voice, smooth as ever. "We just stopped by. Wanted to check the windows and safety. That house is a big responsibility, Avery." "You didn't think to ask?" "I didn't think you'd mind," she said. "We're family." I hung up. A few hours later, as I was boarding the train, Jules texted. "Hey, your house smells like fried chicken. Someone's been here. Also, the back door was unlocked." I called her immediately. "They left something behind," she said. "A tote bag with Emma's name on it, and there's sweet tea in the fridge that wasn't there this morning." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Should I stay the night?" she asked. "No," I said. "Lock up. I'll deal with it." I sat in my seat on the train, watching the landscape blur past the window, and felt something shift. Not anger, exactly. Not yet. But something colder than disappointment. They had come. Not as guests, not with permission, but with assumption. It wasn't a break-in. It didn't need to be. This was what entitlement looked like when it dressed itself in family ties. I opened my phone again, scrolled past the Facebook post, and sent a text to Tyree McCall, a lawyer I'd gone to college with and occasionally ran into at city planning mixers. "Hey, need advice? Tenant law, urgent." He replied within minutes. "Call me tomorrow. We'll talk options." I tried to focus on the conference. I sat through 2 panels and gave my presentation without fumbling, but I barely remember any of it. My mind kept flicking back to the kitchen photo, to Jules's voice, to the slow realization that my boundaries had already been crossed before I even left town. That night, as the train pulled back into Athens, I didn't even go home right away. I sat in the terminal parking lot with the engine off, the dome light casting a faint glow over the dashboard. At midnight, I finally unlocked the front door. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner again. The kids' shoes, small, colorful, with Velcro straps, were lined up next to mine. My mother was asleep on the couch, a throw blanket from my guest room pulled up to her chin. In the kitchen, the pantry door stood open. Lana was rearranging my shelves, moving spices, stacking cereal boxes, lining up cans. She didn't even look startled when I walked in. "Oh," she said, smiling faintly. "We figured it'd be easier to settle now before the school year gets busy." I didn't answer. I just looked past her, to the mantel. A photo frame I'd never seen before sat dead center. It was their wedding portrait. Framed. Centered. As if it belonged. As if I didn't. "We figured it's just easier this way," Travis said, carving into the roast I didn't make. "You move into the basement, it has its own entrance." I blinked. Across from me, Lana was refilling glasses. My mother reached across the table for the salt. My father folded his napkin with the same precision he used to use when ironing his uniforms. It took me a moment to realize that no one was joking. The meal had appeared sometime around 6. I'd come home from work and found the kitchen already busy. Elaine at the stove, Lana chopping vegetables, Travis unpacking groceries onto my counters. There was no mention of whether I'd be joining for dinner. The assumption, like everything else this week, had been made for me. Now the 5 of us sat around my dining table like we did this every Sunday. Except this wasn't Sunday, and this wasn't their house. Elaine took a bite and gestured toward the hall. 3 bedrooms, no children. It's almost selfish, Avery." Lana nodded. "We could make the office into a playroom. It already gets good light." Franklin chimed in with his favorite tone of calm finality. "Family shares, son. That's how it's always been." I looked down at my plate. Roasted carrots, mashed potatoes, perfectly sliced turkey, all arranged neatly, as if that somehow legitimized the takeover. The food wasn't the issue. It was the script they were reading from, the one where I was just a temporary steward of space until something more deserving came along. Then Travis leaned back, folded his hands, and said it. Quiet, casual, like a line he'd practiced. "You don't even have a family to worry about." The words landed like a stone in a still pond. No ripple, just the sudden cold depth beneath them. No wife, no children, no one who needed me, and therefore no claim. I didn't say anything. Not at first. I simply stood up, nodded once, and walked upstairs. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, not crying, not screaming, just breathing. Counting. 12 floorboards between the edge of my bed and the closet. 3 seconds between inhaling and exhaling. 7 years of work to buy this house. They weren't stealing it. Not in the legal sense. But they were rewriting its meaning, redefining who belonged and who merely occupied. I opened the closet, slid the safe forward, and entered the code with fingers that didn't shake. Inside was a folder. Beige, thick, worn at the corners. Jules had labeled it in black Sharpie months ago, Operation Evict Politely. We'd started it as a joke. "In case of family invasion," she'd said. I laughed then. It didn't feel funny now. I pulled out the documents, copies of property law, notes from Tyree, draft emails, and boundary guidelines. It was all there. My phone was already in my hand. Me. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring Tyree." She replied within seconds. "Jules, I'll bring muffins too. You'll need sugar." I smiled, just a little. Downstairs I could still hear them laughing, forks clinking against plates, the hum of conversation as if nothing were wrong. I stood, straightened my shirt, and headed back down. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard my father's voice, low but clear. He was never built to lead anything. They didn't know I was there. I didn't say a word. In the hallway, something else had changed. The photo that used to hang there, my framed diploma from the University of Georgia, was gone. In its place, a wedding portrait of Travis and Lana, smiling beneath a canopy of autumn leaves. It was perfectly centered. "I've called this meeting," I began, standing in my own living room, because we need clarity on residency, legality, and boundaries. The words felt strange in my mouth. Formal, like something said in a city council hearing or a courtroom, not in the home I bought, paid for, painted, lived in. But the formality was the point. Across from me, my family sat on the couch. Franklin with his arms crossed, Elaine perched at the edge with her purse clutched tightly in her lap. Travis slouched and silent. Lana was in the kitchen, within earshot but pretending to be too busy restacking mugs to join. To my right sat Jules, legs crossed, notepad in her lap, face unreadable but eyes sharp. Evan, beside her, one hand resting lightly on the table. And Tyree, my old college friend turned civil attorney, flipping calmly through a folder thick with case references and printed screenshots. Between us was a coffee table lined with documents, property records, email exchanges, legal printouts. Everything we would need, not to fight, but to clarify. Tyree cleared his throat. Under Georgia law, uninvited occupancy of private property for more than 72 consecutive hours without the owner's consent may qualify as trespass. There are additional complications when the occupants are family, but the law doesn't dissolve just because people share blood. No one spoke. Jules leaned forward and slid a printed sheet across the table. The email header was still visible. Travis's name, dated 3 years ago. "We can't keep bailing you out," it read. "Some of us have real families to take care of." I took a breath. That was the last time anyone here returned a call. Elaine blinked. "Avery," I held up a hand. "No, I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm here to define the present." Franklin scoffed. "Define it? This is a family matter, not a court case." "Then you shouldn't have brought your lawyer," Jules said sweetly, without looking up from her notes. I turned back to them. "You've said I don't have a family. Maybe I didn't then. But I do now. And this house? This life? It's mine. Not yours to make easier, not yours to share, not yours to treat like a safety net because your plans didn't pan out." Elaine sniffed, offended but silent. Travis stared at the floor. I walked to the front door and picked up the small ceramic bowl that had always held the spare key, the one I'd left there out of sentiment, or maybe naivety. Inside was a single, slightly worn key. I held it up. "This was mine," I said quietly. "Not anymore." I slipped it into my pocket. No one moved. For a moment the room was so quiet I could hear the old clock in the hallway tick. Then Franklin stood up. "You'd turn away your own blood?" "I'm not turning you away," I said. "You already walked out years ago. This is just me locking the door behind you." Jules stood too. "You have 24 hours to vacate. After that, Avery is within legal right to pursue formal notice." Elaine looked like she might cry. Lana still didn't come out from the kitchen. One by one, they stood. They didn't argue. That was the most surprising part. They just packed. Elaine folded the throw blanket she'd used. Franklin gathered the mug he insisted on using every morning. Travis carried out a tote bag marked with Jacob's name. No one thanked me. No one apologized. At the doorway, Elaine turned. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice was steady. "One day," she said, "you'll need family, Avery. Don't be surprised if no one shows up." I didn't answer. The door clicked shut behind them. A quiet, final sound. I stood there, hand still resting on the wood, not to keep them out, but to steady myself. This wasn't rage, it was grief. And also, finally, relief. The morning after the showdown, I sat on the back porch with my first cup of coffee, in a house that was finally quiet. Not the tense, hesitant quiet that had settled in after my family arrived like an uninvited storm. Not the silence that comes from fear or fatigue. This was peace. and I almost didn't recognize it. The chair beneath me creaked, the coffee was lukewarm, the dog from next door barked at a passing squirrel. It was all ordinary, forgettable, except for how deeply I felt it. Then the phone rang. I didn't flinch, I didn't brace, I just looked down, saw the name, and answered. "Aunt Celia," I said. "Thank you," she said before I could get another word in, "for finally standing up." Her voice was warm but steady, not overly sentimental. The way someone speaks when they've watched a storm gather for years and are finally seeing a break in the clouds. "They're calling you selfish now," she added. I sighed. She continued, "But I remember when you were sleeping in your car, and not one of them offered you a couch." My hand tightened around the coffee mug. "You deserved better then. You still do now." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until it was said out loud. "Thank you," I said quietly. After we hung up, I stayed out there a while longer. Let the stillness settle in my chest. It wasn't heavy. It was grounding. An hour later, Jules knocked on the side door and let herself in like she always did. She held a brown paper bag in one hand and a carton of coffee in the other. "Emergency delivery," she said. "Muffins and validation." She sat across from me on the porch steps, handed me a blueberry one. "I brought extras," she added, "but Evan said you probably haven't eaten yet." I smiled. He's right. We sat in silence for a bit, chewing. She didn't press. Jules never did. Finally, she looked over. "Victory doesn't always feel good. Doesn't mean it isn't one." I nodded. "It's not joy. It's just breathing again." Breathing counts. Later that afternoon, Evan came home. He kissed the top of my head like it was routine and sat beside me on the couch. "You didn't just keep your house," he said after a long pause. "You kept yourself." I didn't answer, but I reached for his hand and held it. That night, after they both left, I went into my office and opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a manila envelope marked in my handwriting, 2019, rock bottom. Inside, eviction notices, overdraft statements, emails that started with "Thank you for your application" and ended with nothing. I laid them out on my desk, looked at each one, felt every weight I used to carry. Then I tacked them up on the corkboard, not out of shame, not for motivation, but as truth. That happened. I lived it. And I came out the other side. Before bed, I sent Celia a message. "If you want help with that rose garden this spring, I've got time." A small thing, but maybe the right next one. Just as I set the phone down, it buzzed again. Facebook notification. Elaine Holt tagged you in a post. I didn't have to open it to know. Still, I tapped. A photo of an old family tree she'd posted last summer. She'd cropped it. The part with my name was gone. Caption: "When children forget their roots, the tree breaks." I stared at it for a full minute. Then I closed the app and opened my messages. Me. "Dinner tonight?" Evan. "Always." Me. "Let's celebrate the silence." The text came mid-morning. "Emma misses you. Just us two? Dinner?" I stared at the screen longer than I should have. There was a time when those words would have felt like a thread back to something whole. But not anymore. Still, I said yes. Downtown Athens. An old Italian place tucked between a used bookstore and a boutique that only sold things made of wood. I'd brought Evan there on our second date. He'd loved the garlic knots, said they tasted like someone's grandmother still worked in the kitchen. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered water, chose the corner booth. Travis arrived 20 minutes late. No apology, just a casual, "Traffic was worse than I thought." He slid into the booth across from me, already scrolling through his phone. "Place smells the same," he said. "That garlic, man." I didn't answer. After the waitress took his order, We sat in silence for a stretch. The kind that isn't comfortable. The kind that stretches and creaks like old floorboards. Travis finally leaned forward. "Look, I didn't know it would go that far." I looked at him. "Didn't you?" He sighed. "I have 2 kids. Lana's between jobs. I needed options." "And I needed family," I said, voice steady. 3 years ago. I needed someone to call, to answer, to care." He flinched slightly, like the memory had teeth. "I thought you had it handled," he said weakly. "You've always been resourceful." I nodded. That's one word for it. Our meals arrived. I didn't remember ordering. I pushed a ravioli around the plate with my fork, not hungry. "I don't regret protecting my family," Travis said after a moment. "But I'm sorry you don't have one to protect." I met his eyes then. "You think I'm alone," I said. "You're wrong." He blinked. I continued. "Evan is family. Jules is family. Celia, Donnie. Hell, even the guy at the hardware store who asks how I'm doing more than you ever did. That's family." Travis sat back. We finished our meal in silence. When the check came, I reached for it. Travis moved, half-hearted. "I can get mine." "I've got it," I said. He didn't fight me. As I handed the waitress my card, I added quietly, "Not because you deserve it, because I don't want the wait." He looked away. Outside, the air had cooled. Spring was slipping into early summer, and the scent of jasmine clung to the sidewalks. Travis stood beside me for a moment. "When Mom gets sick," he said, "not if, and she will, you'll have to choose." I didn't look at him, didn't ask what he meant. I just walked. No anger, no goodbye, just steps away from something that had already been broken long before tonight. On the way home, I stopped by Celia's flower shop. The lights were low, but the door was open. She didn't ask questions, just wrapped a bunch of lavender in brown paper and handed it over. "For your table," she said softly. At home, I placed the bundle in a ceramic vase Jules had given me last Christmas. The scent filled the kitchen like something quiet and kind, something that didn't demand. I sat down to dinner, alone but not lonely, and the air still smelled like peace. Jules walked in carrying a dusty folder like it was made of glass. "Found this in Celia's attic," she said, placing it carefully on my kitchen table. "It's from your grandmother. You might want to sit down." I didn't. She slid it across the table and took a muffin from the tray I hadn't offered. Jules didn't need an invitation anymore. I opened the folder and read the first page. The paper was yellowing at the corners, typed on a machine that probably hadn't worked in decades. At the top, "Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Holt, my grandmother." I kept reading. It was an old draft, 1998, maybe earlier. And there, halfway down the second page, was my name, clear as daylight. "To my grandson, Avery Holt, I leave the parcel of land at Route 3, Oglethorpe County. He always saw value where others didn't." I blinked. The land wasn't big, barely 2 acres. But I remembered it. Brush-covered, half-forgotten, with a broken gate and a rusted sign that had once said Eleanor's Wildflowers. I'd visited once when I was a kid. She'd let me plant marigolds. The memory hit harder than I expected. I handed the page to Jules. She read it silently, then pulled out her phone. "We should ask Tyree." I nodded. 20 minutes later, Tyree sat at the same table, tie loosened, glasses perched halfway down his nose. He flipped through the pages, frowning. "The original was replaced," he said. Quietly. "I'd bet it was around the time she got sick. Someone, maybe your mom, had a lawyer draft a revision." I clenched my jaw. "Did Grandma know?" Tyree shrugged. "Hard to say. But this version here, This one never made it to the courthouse." Celia came by later that evening, holding a cup of mint tea and a look I couldn't quite read. "I didn't know about the land," she said, "but I do remember your mother saying you didn't need more property. You had your spreadsheets and your zoning maps. What could a patch of trees offer you?" I laughed, but it didn't sound like joy. "Apparently, a reminder." Celia leaned her elbows on the table. "She meant well, maybe. But she took something from you, not just dirt and grass. She took the idea that you mattered enough to be written in ink." That was the part that stuck. It wasn't the land I wanted. It was the acknowledgement. The simple truth that someone had thought of me, set something aside, carved out a space with my name on it. And that space had been erased, not sold, not offered, just removed. I took the map of the property and traced its lines with my finger. The borders were uneven, the corners hand-drawn. It was messy, but it had once been mine. I folded the paper and placed it back in the folder. "I don't need the land," I said, "but I want to grow something anyway." Later that week, I stood with Evan in the backyard, hands on hips, scanning the empty strip of grass behind the magnolia tree. "What do you think?" I asked. He shaded his eyes. "I think you could fit a greenhouse here. Small, intentional. Yours." We spent Saturday building it. It wasn't fancy. Just wood framing, polycarbonate panels, a sliding door we found at the hardware salvage yard. But every nail I hammered felt like an act of reclamation. This was my land. This was my name. This was what I would leave behind. Not through blood, but through choice. When it was finished, Evan stepped inside, arms outstretched. "What do you want to plant first?" he asked. I looked around. The sun filtered through the panels in soft gold. "Ginger," I said. "Takes time, but once it roots, it's hard to kill." He smiled. Before going in, I climbed a small step stool and screwed a wooden plaque above the door. Burned into the grain. Second roots. It didn't matter what the will had said. I was building my own inheritance now. It had been 1 year to the day since I turned the key in the front door and called this place home. To mark it, I planned a dinner. Nothing extravagant, just people I trusted. People who'd shown up, consistently, quietly, without needing a title to prove why. Evan cooked. Roasted vegetables with rosemary, something with lemon and garlic that made the kitchen smell like memory. Jules brought wine, 3 bottles. "Just in case we feel feelings," she said with a wink. Donnie showed up with a store-bought pie and a linen napkin folded into a triangle like he'd Googled how to look domestic. We sat around the long oak table I'd sanded and stained myself. Evan had lit candles. Jules arranged fresh herbs in mason jars. The light from the dining room hung low and golden, catching the edge of every smile. There were 6 of us. Donnie, Jules, Evan, Celia, a friend from work, and me. 7 chairs. One of them stayed empty. Intentionally. No one asked why. The chair was at the far end of the table, just opposite mine. I'd wiped it clean, pulled it out slightly, left a linen napkin folded on the plate. I didn't light the candle in front of it. Some things are more powerful unlit. The night moved softly. Laughter, glasses clinking, stories repeated and reshaped. No one raised their voice. No one took more than they needed. The food passed hand to hand, like memory, like care. At one point, Donnie looked around and said, "This home breathes. You built that." I nodded, but I didn't speak. Jules raised her glass. "You survived them," she said simply, "and you chose better." Evan smiled at me from across the table. "You taught me what family looks like when it's not inherited. It's earned." I swallowed hard, felt something tighten and release in my chest. When it was time for the toast, I stood, held my glass gently. They once said I didn't have a family, I said, voice quiet but steady. They were right, then, but I do now. Everyone raised their glass. No one clapped, no one forced a cheer, they just drank, and no one looked at the empty chair. Later, after the dishes had been cleared and the pie demolished, Evan sat beside me on the porch. The night air was cool, the magnolia rustled. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime sang to itself. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. And I meant it. For the first time, I didn't measure my life by who wasn't there, only by who had stayed. After everyone left, I walked back into the dining room and looked at the chair one more time. Still empty, still silent, and still necessary. It wasn't a placeholder anymore. It was a monument, a reminder of what I had stopped chasing. My phone buzzed, a message from Elaine. "Franklin's in the hospital. Stroke. He's stable, but he asked for you." I stared at the screen for a long while. Then I looked at the chair, still untouched, still mine. And I didn't move. My mother's letter sat unopened on the kitchen counter. The envelope was pale blue, her handwriting still rounded at the edges like it had been since I was a kid. On the back, in smaller script, "We all make mistakes, but family shows up when it matters." I read that line over and over. 3 years ago, I needed someone. No one showed up. Franklin had suffered a minor stroke, according to the message. Stable, recovering. Elaine wanted me to come for a week, as if I were still the standby son, the one who'd silently show up when it was inconvenient for everyone else. Evan offered to come with me. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. But I shook my head. "Some roads," I told him, "you have to walk without witnesses." He didn't push, just rested a hand on my shoulder and let the silence sit between us. Later that morning, I told Jules. "You don't owe them closure," she said, "especially not the kind they demand." Donnie, who had stopped by to drop off a folder of project maps, disagreed. Gently. "Forgiveness," he said, "isn't for them. It's for you. It's a release. Yours, not theirs." I nodded. But inside, I wasn't sure what I believed. That evening, I sat at my desk. The light outside had turned gold, the way it always did just before dusk. A soft, forgiving kind of light. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, unfolded it, smoothed the creases, and I wrote. "I forgive you," I began, "not because you deserve it, because I deserve to be free. I forgive the silence, the omission, the absence when I asked, begged even, for presence. I forgive the assumptions that my life didn't need room, that my home was waiting to be filled by someone more valid, more traditional, more useful to you. I forgive the idea that your disappointment ever had anything to do with me." I stopped there, read it once, then again. My hands didn't shake. I folded the letter slowly, slid it into an envelope, sealed it without writing a name. Then I placed it in the back of the drawer I used for spare chargers and dead pens. It would stay there. Forgiveness doesn't always require delivery. Sometimes it's enough to speak it aloud to no one, to remove the weight from your own chest and leave it behind, unopened. I didn't need their apology. I needed to stop bleeding from wounds they no longer remembered inflicting. The next morning, I went to the flower shop down the street. Celia was there, arranging tulips. "I need something calm," I said. She handed me white lilies and a small note card. I wrote, "Wishing peace and recovery. Avery." No more, no less. At the register, Celia didn't ask who they were for. She just nodded, as if she understood more than I said. When I got home, I watered the garden. The new greenhouse caught the late sun, throwing soft light across the grass. The ginger we planted last week had begun to push through, little green shoots defying the odds. My phone buzzed. A text from Travis. Thanks for not turning your back completely. Emma asks if you'll come to her birthday next month. I read it once, didn't reply. Instead, I stepped inside, opened the drawer, and looked at the envelope again. Still there. Still sealed. Then I returned to the garden. Because sometimes, forgiveness grows in silence. I adjusted my tie in the mirror. It wasn't the kind of tie that shouted anything. Navy blue, matte, the knot not quite symmetrical. But it was pressed, and it was clean. Beside me on the bathroom counter sat a small box wrapped in lavender paper. Inside was a compass necklace with Emma's initials engraved in tiny script. I wasn't sure I wanted to go, but I would. The backyard was smaller than their last place, with patchy grass and a plastic playset that had seen better years. Folding chairs circled the fire pit, and a banner that said, "Happy 8th, Emma," drooped slightly at one end. There were parents I didn't recognize, and kids running in wild, joyful packs. It smelled like grilled hot dogs and dollar store cupcakes. Someone was playing a Kids Bop version of a top 40 hit through a Bluetooth speaker. I stood at the edge of it all for a moment, watching. Then I stepped in. Lana spotted me first. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress and carrying a plate of watermelon. Her expression flickered, something between pleasant surprise and quiet calculation. "Wow, Avery," she said. "You look healthy." I gave a half smile. "I try to eat my greens." Elaine came up next. She looked older, a little smaller in the shoulders, though her posture hadn't changed. "I didn't expect you'd come," she said, voice soft. "But I'm glad you did." "I'm here for Emma," I said. She nodded. That was the end of it. Travis appeared a few minutes later, holding a juice box. "We're trying," he said. "It's messy, but we're trying." I didn't say anything. Then Emma ran over. She launched herself into my side with the kind of force only a kid her size could manage. "Uncle Avery!" she shouted, and for a second, the party quieted around us. I knelt to her level, handed her the small box. "Happy birthday, kiddo." She took it, grinned, and then whispered, "I still have the picture you took of me in your old garden. It's in my secret box." That single sentence cracked something in me. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a kid holding on to a good memory. But for the first time that day, I was glad I came. We sat together under the folding table, unwrapping juice box straws and laughing about nothing. For 15 minutes, I wasn't Travis's brother or Elaine's disappointment. I was just someone Emma trusted. When they brought out the cake, I slipped away. No speeches, no dramatic exits, just a quiet goodbye to a day that didn't need to become more than it was. On the way out, near the folding table stacked with unopened presents, I saw a photo in a white frame. It was me and Emma in my backyard, last fall, raking leaves into piles she never jumped in. I hadn't given them that picture. Someone had found it. Someone had made space for me, without asking. Back home, I hung my blazer and loosened my tie. Evan had left a candle burning on the dining table, the scent something like cinnamon and cedar. My phone buzzed. "Evan. Still room at the dinner table tonight?" I typed without hesitation. "Me. Always." "Who should we list as your emergency contact?" The nurse asked the question without looking up, pen poised over the intake form like it was the easiest thing in the world. For the first time in my life, I didn't pause. I sat in the small waiting room at the clinic near my house, one of those places with faint music overhead and posters about cholesterol that hadn't been updated since the Obama administration. It was just a routine checkup, nothing urgent, but the moment felt bigger. She tapped the form again. "Spouse? Parent? Sibling?" I smiled. "No," I said. "But I'm not short on family." She looked up, one brow raised. I leaned over and wrote, Evan Taylor, Jules Carter, Donnie Sharp. 3 names, no qualifiers, no explanations. When she took the form and walked away, I exhaled. The kind that lives in your ribs for too long. Back home, I changed into sweats, made tea, and stood for a moment in the kitchen, letting the quiet settle. Not empty, just still. Then I did something small, but strangely powerful. I called each of them, not to tell them they were listed, not to make it official, just to say thank you. Evan picked up on the first ring. Hey, he said, voice warm. You okay? I'm good, I replied. Just wanted you to know I wrote your name down today. There was a pause. What do you mean? Emergency contact form. You're number 1. I could hear his smile through the line. Well, he said, then I guess I'll keep my phone on. We sat in companionable silence for a while. Then he said something that made me pause. Honestly? I worried you might go back to them. I took a breath. I did go back, I said. And I came home. That's the difference. Later I called Jules. She didn't answer, probably mid-spreadsheet, but she texted right back. You better have put me second. Evan's better at directions. Then Donnie. He was in a meeting, but he left me a voicemail later that night. Appreciate the vote of confidence. I may not be good in a crisis, but I'll drive fast if needed. After the calls, I walked into the bathroom, printed a copy of the contact list, and taped it inside the cabinet door. Not for emergencies, but for certainty. So that on the days when I questioned who had shown up, who had stayed, I wouldn't have to wonder. I'd just open the door and see. That night, the group chat lit up. Jules, booked the lake house, chosen family getaway incoming. Donnie, I call dibs on the hammock. Evan, I'll pack wine. Avery packs nothing. This is non-negotiable. I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen, and texted back a single thumbs-up emoji. Before bed, I opened my desk drawer and found the card Jules had given me for my last birthday. I'd tucked it between tax papers and charger cables. The envelope was slightly bent. Inside, in her looping handwriting, it read, Home is who lets you be quiet without disappearing. I set it on the nightstand, turned off the light, and slept like someone who finally knew where he belonged. 1 year. That's how long it had been since I unlocked the front door, stepped onto creaky hardwood, and told myself, this is mine. But today, for the first time, it felt like it called me back. The house had been many things in 12 months, shelter, silence, battleground. But tonight, it was something simpler. A home. There were no speeches, no centerpieces, just dinner. Evan sautéed something with thyme and lemon. Donnie brought a bottle of red he couldn't pronounce. Jules showed up with a paper bag full of bread and a playlist she refused to explain. Celia carried a tray of roasted carrots with cumin and a pie that looked like forgiveness. We squeezed around the long oak table, a mix of mismatched chairs and elbow bumps. Someone knocked over a water glass. The napkins didn't match. The music skipped once. It was perfect. The house was full, but not crowded. Donnie leaned back in his chair, plate scraped clean. This house breathes, he said. Jules raised her glass. So do you. Celia smiled. Sometimes family isn't born, she said. It's built. Evan stood and tapped his fork gently to his wine glass. To second roots, he said. The words landed softly, like the clink of silverware on ceramic. No one cheered. We didn't need to. I stood too. They once said I didn't have a family, I said. I didn't need to explain who they were. Everyone at the table already knew. Maybe I didn't, I continued, voice steady. Now I do. We drank. Quietly. Together. After dessert, peach cobbler with too much cinnamon, just the way Evan liked it, I stepped outside. The air was cool but not cold. Spring teasing summer. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and gave up. I walked barefoot across the yard to the magnolia tree. It had grown taller since last year. Fuller. A few early blossoms had opened, white petals against dark green leaves. This was the same tree they once imagined as a jungle gym, a photo backdrop, a claim. But it didn't belong to them. It didn't even belong to me. It bloomed for itself. I stood beneath it, let the moonlight filter through the branches, and felt my chest rise without tightness. I wasn't broken. I wasn't alone. I had never been empty, only waiting to be filled by the right people. Back inside, I retrieved a small wooden sign I'd stained myself the week before. The letters had been burned in carefully, each stroke deliberate. Second roots, est the day I stopped asking for permission. I screwed it into the siding beside the door. Then I stepped back and looked at it. Not as decoration, but declaration. No one had to approve it. No one had to inherit it. It was mine. Later, after the dishes were done and the wine had run out, everyone filtered out with hugs and leftovers. Jules left behind half a loaf of bread on purpose. Donnie promised to call more often. Celia kissed my cheek like she had when I was 10. Evan stayed. We sat together in the living room, legs tucked beneath us, the house humming with the after sound of laughter. When the clock slipped past midnight, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. No occasion, no ritual, just a quiet thank you. To the walls that held me when others didn't. To the floor that stayed beneath me when the rest fell away. To the roof that never asked if I was worthy. The house didn't save me, but it waited. And tonight, it felt like it had chosen me too. Family isn't defined by who shares your name. It's defined by who shows up, listens, and stays. As we grow older, it becomes clearer that peace often comes not from fixing broken ties, but from building new ones with people who honor your worth. It's okay to let go of what hurt you, even if it wore the face of family. You're allowed to choose peace, and you're allowed to call it home. If this story spoke to your heart, we invite you to like the video and subscribe to our channel. We share real, meaningful family stories that remind us of what matters most. Take a moment to explore our other tales. You might find one that feels like yours.